Hi everyone. Um, so let's just get right into it. So usually this is like our reaction when we like see new technology, and just a heads up, you're going to have like a lot of memes in this talk. So this is like our reaction. We're always like, oh my god, this is so neat, but then wow, it sounds too good to be true. And then when we eventually like delve into using this like technology, most of us are really curious, but then when we see that it might look like it's an overload or of some sort, we tend to just scatter like these cute cats. So today we're going to be talking about how GraphQL boosts performance with Gatsby. My name is Obinna Ekwuno. You can get me on Twitter at Obinna Speaks. I am a software engineer at Gatsby JS, and I'm also a media developer expert for Cloudinary, which is really cool because like I get to talk about like media stuff and performance with like some really brilliant people. I also write a bunch of technical articles, and my friends call me an accessibility nuisance because like I really preach a lot about accessibility on the web. Let's get right to it. So let's think about data fetching. When like we talk about like data fetching in like applications, we usually think of like the fetch API, getting like information into like your front end application from like an endpoint using like the fetch API, or using Axios, which like is a really cool library. Or mostly you could just use like GraphQL. I particularly love to use GraphQL for fetching data because like it reduces like some the risk of like overfetching or underfetching, and like amongst like some other awesome advantages of using GraphQL. Now the big question is always when to pull in this data. Because of like the shift in like the way we think of like the web right now, you would see that a lot of like static site generators have like come up, and then you see like a lot of static content like MDX or MD, and like a really it's really cool. But then when do you pull in this data, and when is it all right to pull data in? So most people argue build time versus runtime. Most people argue that building your info, getting data at build time is really fast, which is what the static site generators do. And like getting like all of this information at build time is awesome. Runtime not so much. But then the truth is, um, build time is cool, but like it's maybe not. You can't really do that for like everything. And so fetching data at runtime can have some performance disadvantages because, for example, if you're in a region like mine, I live in Lagos, Nigeria, the internet isn't always really trustworthy. So having to like pull in like if you have like all the data coming in um from like an endpoint, and maybe the user has like slow 3G running, you would have like a bunch of like your information just hanging, which would not be like really cool for like your user. Um, but then it has to be done. You have to pull in data sometimes at runtime because you can't really do every single thing at build time. Yeah. So now let's get to like the really cool parts. GraphQL and Gatsby. I like to call it a tale of two cities. And mostly the reaction to people when they hear GraphQL and Gatsby is, what? Why? That sounds like a lot. But then I'll explain to you why GraphQL is good for like the way Gatsby uses it, and also what it entails. So the good question is why. So Gatsby uses GraphQL in its data layer for fetching data at build time, which enables you to have like those content readily generated for you when you've like started your application, so that you have all that content fetched for you before your user actually starts to query them. So before we see why Gatsby uses GraphQL, let's think about what it would look like without GraphQL. So there are three ways to create pages in a Gatsby application. You can either use like the create pages API, which you can programmatically create pages if you're fetching in data from like different sources, or you can make use of the like pages folder. So Gatsby automatically creates routes by anything you put from any component you put in the page folder, and that's really cool. Or you can use like a plugin to create pages. So in this example, we're going to be using the create pages API. So if you look at this, you would notice that around here you would have like you have to like create pages for like and specify like the path, and then feeding like this context into like your application, into the template that's using it, which is like found in the templates with context, as you can see. And then in that template, you would have to like using like the page context. So everything declared in. So let me just go back one slide. This function is usually called in the Gatsby node file, which helps you to like do like some APIs, using some Gatsby APIs to be able to like do some awesome stuff. And you would, anything you create there via create pages, the context will be available in your templates via the page context. So then we see joining this data as page context dot title and dangerously setting inner HTML. Please do not ever dangerously set inner HTML in any application. I would not advise that. It's not right. But then the problem now is that for every page you want to create, you would have to create the routes for this page and also have to setting this information every single time. That's not right. It's a lot of like stress, and then it seems like a lot to do for like every single query or page you need to create. So Gatsby provides GraphQL abstractions, which look kind of like this. So instead of having to like create those pages every single time, you would just like use like a GraphQL. So Gatsby ships with GraphQL under the hood, and then you can like query for like the GraphQL for your pages and the edges, the nodes. So this is like a structure of how, if you're familiar with GraphQL, this is how the structure of like how the queries look like. And then you would notice that we do not query for like all the information all at once. We use like a slug, which is kind of like, say, could be a string. You could also use an ID. And then for each of this, for each node, we would use the slug to create like create the routes, and then resolving the components that we want that the route to like show the template we want the route to use, and then use this slug as context, and then pass that into the templates, which like I said earlier, would be available via page context, and then you would have all that information here for you. Now, this seems like a lot, because if you think about it, now you would ask, do I need to learn GraphQL? Because I have just explained like a lot of things, especially most people are familiar with GraphQL. A lot of people that come into using Gatsby do not exactly have like knowledge of GraphQL. And because of how Gatsby like ships, we tend to like make everything in the lowest level, so that people would create, like, we just want people to create really fast, performant, accessible applications without having to stress so much. So you would wonder, do you need to learn GraphQL? Do I need to learn GraphQL to be able to like use this awesome awesome feature? Well, no, you wouldn't need to learn GraphQL, and I'll explain why. So it kind of looks like I got all that query from my head, but like there's an interface that helps you to use to query your data, and it would help you, and I'll show you how. But then if you want to learn GraphQL, it's a really fine choice. I, for example, use GraphQL in a Gatsby context for like a few months before I finally learned how to use GraphQL. And then, you know, you would be able to like use like the customized schema API that Gatsby offers you to be able to like create more types if you need to like maybe work on a plugin. So it doesn't really limit you. It kind of just gives you like a borderline of what you can use, and then stuff that you can build on top of. So this is the interface I was speaking of. This is the GraphiQL interface, which kind of, if you look at the left here, you would see like a bunch of query fields, and then you would see the things in purple are the options. So if you click on like this query field, like for example, this is an example I did on for content, a contentful blog, then you would click on like the contentful full lesson, and then you click on like different options to query via slug, which is equal to like this. So all of this query was just generated by me clicking around here. And then if you know how your data is structured, you would be able to create these queries by just clicking. If you hit this play button, you would see like what to expect in the queries. And this has just given you like a query to like put into what we saw here, which is really cool. You can also go a step further to like even export the code for this templates by clicking on the code exporter, which can like give you like an example of what it thinks your template will look like. But then it has given you like the query for the templates, which like really saves you a lot of time. So now that I've explained like how Gatsby uses GraphQL on the data layer, the question that comes up for me would be, okay, so what are the performance implications of pulling in like GraphQL into Gatsby? In my experience, it doesn't really have so many performance disadvantages. It's always a performance advantage, but then it depends on how you use it. So for example, if you query all fields in like the Gatsby node.js, when I mean by querying all fields, if we look at the last example, we queried like for the slug and then use the slug as like a point to get like all the fields that we need. And if you look at this example right now, you would see that instead of querying for the slug, I'm querying for all the fields that I need, all the fields I think I need in my templates. And if I query for all of them in like the initial query in my Gatsby node.js, I would have to like, and then I do the resolving parts and then the components and the context. I would then go to like my templates and just pass them in using the page context. Sounds pretty easy. But then here's the catch. Because you're querying all of this like all at once, what Gatsby does when you use like the page like context and everything, and you're querying pages programmatically, is that it stores like your page metadata in like a Redux store. And like for really large like sites or applications, so by really large I mean either like the number of pages that you're handling or the amount of data that you're like that's passing through like context, you would notice that like you might have like an out of memory crash due to the fact that it's querying all of that information at build time. And then because like there's so much memory pressure, Node.js will try to like do some like garbage collection, which is like a known performance issue. So like we really advise not to do this. That's one trade-off of using this method. The second is that whenever you do this, you take hot reload off the table. So for every single time that you need to change anything in this query here, you would have to rebuild your application. And by rebuilding your application, you would lose like a great advantage of like, there's a new feature that shipped to Gatsby Cloud, which is called incremental builds. And incremental builds basically means that whenever you build your application, it does like a first build as a benchmark. And then if you subsequently need to like build your application, it kind of looks for the difference in the content changes. For now, we just like focus on content changes, but like we're working on getting code changes in. So for every time you change a data, it just looks at the difference and then builds the difference. So you have slower build time. But then when you have all your information coming in from like your Gatsby node, and then you have like you query for all your fields, that goes off the table. So that's another disadvantage of using this method. So for a visual representation of what I'm trying to explain, it's kind of like letting everyone into like the store at the same time. So you have, instead of like people having like their IDs sitting in a comfortable position, and whenever you need them, you just call them for fast build time, you have like everything trying to come in at the same time, which is a lot counterproductive. I wouldn't advise it. So the catch here is that page queries results are not stored in memory permanently and are being saved in disk immediately after running. So you don't want to overload like the disk to avoid like that problem. So please use IDs and use like slugs when you are querying for data using like the GraphQL data layer that Gatsby ships with. I hope that with this like short talk, we don't have like we don't look like Jon Snow in this meme when he says, "Oh, what sorcery is this?" Because it's a cell phone in the movie. Like, why do you have GraphQL in Gatsby? GraphQL is used for like shipping very fast to help you query your data at build time, so that you have like that very fast queries like that Gatsby provides. Thank you so much for listening to my talk, and may the force be with you.
Thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. Do we have any questions in the chat that we want to roll on before
Oh,
we keep it moving? Excellent presentation. You've been getting all love for your memes throughout this entire thing. So you absolutely killed it with the meme game.
thanks.
All right, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate you coming out to talk. Great talk. I appreciate it again, man.